Part 4. Kjaran. Chapter 1. It could have been chaos. Word could have gone out, and 1,000 soldiers and managers and prefects and rebels of every stripe could have plunged the Empire into a civil war that would have undone every work that McCall had built and Richter's had maintained. Could have, but did not, because the mayor of the palace was a man who knew he was not adequate to handle the responsibility thrust on him. Because Kjaran was a woman of great presence of mind, who could set aside grief until she needed it. Richter's Ashen fell into a coma, and when he came out of it he refused to talk. Though his eyes registered that he could see light, he would not blink when something was thrust at his eyes. He would not answer when his arms were raised. They stayed raised until someone put them down. There was no question of his continuing to govern the Empire. No one knew when he would recover, if he ever would. But few people knew there was anything wrong at all. The mayor of the palace immediately put tight security on the places in the palace where the truth could not be concealed. Richter's chambers, where he lay attended by 2 doctors who suspected that, unless something happened, they would never get out of the room alive. Anset's room, where the boy with perfect control, now nearly a man in stature and old in grief, lay weeping hysterically when he was awake. The prison cell, where Joseph came out of his drug stupor and killed himself by stuffing a sheet down his throat until he suffocated. And the rooms where the mayor of the palace and Kjaran met with imperial officials and gave them Richter's instructions, as if Richter's were merely busy elsewhere. Those ministers and advisors who usually had close access to the emperor were sent on assignments that kept them out of reach, so they would not wonder why they were denied his presence. One of them was assigned to replace Anset as manager of Earth, and when anyone asked why Richter's had not held court for so long, the mayor replied, "Richter's has brought his songbird home again, and they wish to be alone." Everyone nodded, and thought they understood. But they could not keep it up indefinitely, they knew. Some decision had to be reached, and it was too hard for them. They were both gifted at government, the mayor and Kjaran, and because they needed help desperately, they depended on each other, and were not jealous, and gradually began to think as one on almost all the issues. When one made a decision alone, it was invariably the decision the other would have made in the same situation. Yet they needed help, and after only 2 weeks, Kjaran decided to do what she had known she would have to do almost from the start. With the mayor's consent, she sent a message to 2, asking Este to leave the high room and come cure the ills of the Empire. Chapter 2. It is quiet, a silence as black as the dark beyond the farthest star. But in the silence Anset hears a song, and he wakes. This time he does not wake to weeping. He does not see Joseph always before him, smiling shyly and carefully, as if he did not feel the mutilation of his body. He does not see McCall crumbling to ash. He does not see any of the visions of agony from his past. This time the song controls his waking, and it is a sweet song of a room in a high stone tower, with fog seeping in at the shutters. It is a song like the caress of a mother's hand in her child's hair. The song holds him and comforts him, and he reaches out his hand, groping in the darkness for a face. And he finds the face, and strokes the forehead. "Mother," he says, and she answers, "Oh, my child." And then she talks in song, and he understands every word, though it is wordless. She tells him of her loneliness without him, and sings softly of her joy at being with him again. She tells him that his life is still rich with possibility, and he is not able to doubt her song. He tries to sing back to her, for once he knew this language, but his voice has been tortured, and when he sings it does not come out as it ought to. He stumbles, and the song is weak and pitiful, and he weeps at his failure. But she holds him in her arms, and comforts him again, and weeps with him into his hair and says, "It's all right, Anset, my son, my son." And, to his surprise, she is right. He goes to sleep again, rocking in her arms, and the blackness goes away, both the blackness of light and the blackness of sound. He has found her again, and she loves him after all. Chapter 3. Este stayed for a year, working quiet miracles. "I never meant to involve myself directly in these things," she said to Kjaran, when it was time for her to leave. "I wish you wouldn't go." "This isn't my real work, Kya. My real work waits for me in the songhouse. This is your work. You do it well. In the year she was there, Este healed the palace while holding the empire at bay. Humanity had been disorganized for more than 20,000 years, knit together in an empire for less than a century. It could have come apart easily. But Este's deft voice was confident and forceful. When it was time to announce that Richter's was ill, she already had the trust or respect or fear of those she had to depend on. She made no decisions. That was for Kjaran and the mayor, who knew what was going on. She only spoke and sang and soothed the million voices that cried to the capital for guidance, for help, that searched in the capital for weakness or sloth. There were no holes for the knives to go in, and by the end of the year the regency was secure. Este, however, regarded as far more important the work she did with Ansett and with Richter's. It was her song that at last brought Richter's out of catalepsia. She was the antidote to Ansett's rage, and while Richter's did not speak for 7 months, he did become attentive, watched as people walked around the room, ate decently, and took care of his own toilet, much to the relief of his doctors. And after 7 months he finally answered when spoken to. His answer was obscene, and the servant he spoke to was mortified, but Este only laughed and came to Richter's and embraced him. "You old bitch," he said, his eyes narrow. "You've taken my place." "Only held it for you, Richter's, until you were ready to fill it again." But it soon became clear that Richter's would never be ready to fill his place. He became cheerful enough, after a time, but he was often overcome by great melancholy. He was taken by whims, and then forgot them suddenly in the middle. Once he left 30 hunters beating the forest, and walked back to the palace, causing a terrible panic until he was found swimming, naked in the river, trying to sneak up on the geese that landed in the eddies near the shore. He could not concentrate on matters of state, and when decisions were brought to him, he acted quickly and rashly, trying to get rid of problems immediately, uncaring whether they were solved right or not. He had lost no memory. He remembered clearly that he had once cared about these things very much. "But it weighs on me now. It chafes me, like a bad-fitting uniform. I'm a terrible emperor, aren't I?" "You're good enough," answered Este, "so long as you don't interfere with those who are willing to bear the burdens." Richter's looked out the window to where the clouds were coming in over the forest. "Already my shoes are full?" "They aren't your shoes, Richter's," Este said. "They're Macaw's. You filled them, and walked a while in them. But now they don't fit, as you said. By staying alive, and putting in an appearance now and then, you can keep the Empire unified, while the others make the decisions you don't care to make anymore. Isn't that fair enough?" "Is it?" "What use do you have for power now? You used it once, and nearly killed everything you loved." He looked at her in horror. "I thought we didn't discuss that." "We don't, except when you need a reminder." And so Richter's lived in his rooms in the palace, and amused himself as he pleased, and put in public appearances so the citizens would know he was alive. But all the business was carried on by underlings, and gradually, as the year went on, Este withdrew herself from the business, failed to attend the meetings, and the mayor and Kjaran ruled together, neither of them strong enough yet to rule alone, both of them glad that ruling alone wasn't necessary. Healing Richter's as much as he could be healed was only part of Este's work. There was Ephraim, in a way the easiest, in a way the hardest. He was only a year old when his father was taken from him and killed, but that was young enough to feel the loss. He cried for his father, who had been tender and playful with him, and Kjaran could not comfort him. So it was Este who took him, and sang to him, until she found the songs that filled the boy's need. "But I won't be here forever," said Este, and he must have someone to replace his father. The mayor was not slow to catch on, and he turned to Kjaran. "He's around the palace, and so am I. I'm convenient, don't you think?" So that before Este had been there 6 months, Ephraim was calling the mayor Daddy, and before Este left the palace, Kjaran and the mayor had signed a contract. "I always call you Mayor," Este said one day. "Don't you have a name?" The mayor laughed. "When I took on this duty, Richter's told me that I had no name. 'You've lost your name,' he said. 'Your name is Mayor, and you are mine.' Well, I'm not really his now, I suppose. But I've got used to having no other name." So Ephraim was healed, and Kjaran with him, almost by accident. Oh, there was none of the passion she had known with Joseph, but she had had enough of passion. There was something just as strong and just as comforting in shared work. There was not a part of her life that she didn't share with the mayor, and there was not a part of his life that he did not share with her. They periodically got quite irritated with each other, but they were never alone. But all these healings, of Richter's, of Ephraim, of Kjaran, of the Empire, they were not Este's most important work. Ansett refused to sing. As soon as the hysteria had ended and he was rational again, she had tried to hear his voice. "Songs can be lost," she said, "but songs can be regained." "I have no doubt of it," he said, "but I have sung my last song." She did not try to persuade him, just hoped that, before she left, she could see a change in his view. There were changes, certainly. He had always been kinder than Richter's, and so the suffering that purged him of all his hatred did not strip him of his personality. He laughed quite soon, and played happily with Ephraim as if he were a younger brother, imitating Ephraim's baby speech perfectly. "I feel like I have 2 children, Kjaran said one day, laughing. "The one will grow up sooner than the other," Este predicted, and Ansett did. In only a few months he was interested in the matters of government. He was one of the few people in the palace who had been there under both Richter's and McCall. He knew many people that the mayor and Kjaran did not. More important, he was much better than Este in understanding what people had to say, what they really meant, what they really wanted, and he was able to answer them the way they needed in order to leave satisfied. It was the remnant of his songs that had made him a good manager of Earth. Now, in the absence of the Emperor, and as Este withdrew herself more and more from government, Ansett began to take the public role, meeting the people Richter's could not be trusted to meet, the dangerous ones that Kjaran and the mayor were not sure they could handle. And it worked well. While Kjaran and the mayor remained virtually unknown to the rest of the Empire, Ansett was already as famous as Richter's and McCall themselves, and though no one ever again heard him sing in the palace as he had before, he was still called the Songbird, and people loved him. Yet he was not really happy, despite his cheerfulness and hard work. The day that Este left, she took him aside, and they spoke. "Mother Este, let me go with you," he said. "No," she answered. "Mother Este," he repeated, "haven't I stayed on Earth long enough? I'm 19. I should have gone home 4 years ago." "4 years ago you could have gone home," Ansett, "but today you can't." He pressed his face into her hand. "Mother, I found you only days before I left the Songhouse. This is the first year I've spent with you. Don't leave me again." She sighed, and the sigh was a song of regret and love that Ansett heard and understood, but did not forgive. "I don't want regret. I want to go home." "And what would you do there, Ansett?" It was a question he had not thought of, probably because he knew in secret that the answer would hurt, and he tried to avoid pain these days. What would he do there? He could not sing, and so he could not teach. He had governed a world and helped to rule an empire. Would he be content as a blind, running the small business affairs of the Songhouse? He would be useless there, and the Songhouse would be a constant reminder to him of all that he had lost. For in the Songhouse there was no escaping the songs. The children sang in all the corridors, and the songs came from the windows into the courtyard, and whispered into the walls, and vibrated gently in the stone underfoot. Ansett would be worse off than even Kjaran had been, for she at least had never sung, and did not know what it was she lacked. Better for the mute to live among other mutes, where no one would notice his silence, and he would not miss his lost voice. "I would do nothing there," Ansett said, "except love you." "I'll remember that," she said, "with all my heart." And she held him close and cried again, because she was leaving. In front of Ansett she had no need of control. Arms were raised. They stayed raised until someone put them down. There was no question of his continuing to govern the Empire. No one knew when he would recover, if he ever would. But few people knew there was anything wrong at all. The mayor of the palace immediately put tight security on the places in the palace where the truth could not be concealed. Richter's chambers, where he lay attended by 2 doctors who suspected that, unless something happened, they would never get out of the room alive. Ansett's room, where the boy with perfect control that would have undone every work that McCall had built and Richter's had maintained. Could have, but did not, because the mayor of the palace was a man who knew he was not adequate to handle the responsibility thrust on him, because Karen was a woman of great presence of mind, who could set aside grief until she needed it. Richter Zashin fell into a coma, and when he came out of it he refused to talk. Though his eyes registered that he could see light, he would not blink when something was thrust at his eyes. He would not answer when his absence. One of them was assigned to replace Ansett as manager of Earth, and when anyone asked why Richter's had not held court for so long, the mayor replied, "Richter's has brought his songbird home again, and they wish to be alone." Everyone nodded, and thought they understood. But they could not keep it up indefinitely, they knew. Some decision had to be reached, and it was too hard for them. They were both gifted at government, the mayor and Karen, and because they needed help desperately, they depended on each other. Part 4. Karen. Chapter 1. It could have been chaos. Word could have gone out, and 1,000 soldiers, and managers, and prefects, and rebels of every stripe could have plunged the empire into a civil war. Now nearly a man in stature, and old in grief, lay weeping hysterically when he was awake. The prison cell, where Joseph came out of his drugged stupor, and killed himself by stuffing a sheet down his throat until he suffocated. And the rooms where the mayor of the palace and Karen met with imperial officials and gave them Richter's instructions, as if Richter's were merely busy elsewhere. Those ministers and advisors who usually had close access to the emperor were sent on assignments that kept them out of reach, so they would not wonder why they were denied his presence.